History is written by the victors, but it is traded by everyone else. We are about to explore 30 hidden histories of ancient trade networks, the secret arteries that pumped life, wealth, and ideas between civilizations millennia before the word globalization existed. You will gain a completely new understanding of how our world was truly built, not just in grand palaces, but in silent desert caravans and on moonlit ocean voyages. How did seashells become a continent-spanning currency? What lost city controlled the flow of sunlight trapped in stone? By the end, you will see the map of the ancient world, not as isolated empires, but as a single, pulsating web of human connection. What forgotten exchange do you think most shaped who we are today? The first thread in this global web begins not on land, but on the open sea. More than 3,000 years ago, picture a vast, empty blue horizon, the most challenging environment our ancestors ever dared to cross. Yet they did. And they did not just drift. They navigated with purpose, carrying a cargo of pure potential. Volcanic glass, known as obsidian, was the steel of the Stone Age. Its edges could be flaked sharper than a modern surgical scalpel, making it invaluable for tools, weapons, and ceremonial objects. But this story is not about the material itself. It is about the astonishing journey it took. A people we call the Lapita, the ancient ancestors of many Polynesian cultures, mastered this ocean. Starting from islands like New Britain, near what is now Papua New Guinea, they launched voyages across thousands of kilometers of open Pacific. Their canoes, laden with distinctive pottery and bundles of raw obsidian, sailed eastward against the prevailing winds and currents, a deliberate act of incredible seamanship. They reached Fiji, Samoa, Tonga. How do we know a specific blade found in Fiji came from a volcano in New Britain? Every volcano has a unique chemical signature, a kind of geological fingerprint. Archaeologists use a technique called chemical fingerprinting. By analyzing tiny samples, they can match an obsidian artifact to its exact source volcano, sometimes thousands of kilometers away. These matches are the breadcrumbs on a map, revealing invisible highways across the deep ocean. This was the Obsidian Road of the Pacific, and it was about far more than sharp tools. That canoe arriving on a new island shore was not just a delivery service. It was a floating packet of culture. The Lapita traders brought with them their language, their styles of intricate stamped pottery, their domesticated animals like pigs and chickens, and the knowledge of how to cultivate taro and yams. The trade network was the backbone, the physical connection that allowed an entire cultural package to leapfrog across the Pacific. It was a network of ideas where the most precious commodity was not the black glass itself, but the shared identity it helped to cement. This web, established around 1500, years before the Common Era, set the stage for the eventual settlement of the most remote islands on Earth. It proves that long before compasses or charts, human curiosity and economic need had already conquered the greatest wilderness on the planet. While the Lapita mastered the open ocean, another kind of currency was being shaped by the relentless Pacific waves. Far to the north, along the rugged coastlines of what is now Vancouver Island in the Pacific Northwest, a different treasure was being gathered from the deep. Dentalium shells, delicate white tusk-shaped tubes from a specific genus of scaphopod mollusk, were not just beautiful ornaments. They became the backbone of a financial system that stretched across a continent. Harvesting them was a specialized, dangerous art. Divers would descend into cold, deep waters, sometimes using weighted boards to sink quickly to pry these fragile shells from the seabed. But the real magic happened on shore. The shells were meticulously cleaned, sorted, and most importantly, graded by size. The longest, most perfectly formed shells commanded the highest value. This grading created a standardized unit of account, much like having different denominations of paper money. A string of large Dentalium shells was worth exponentially more than a string of smaller ones. This was not a barter system. It was a true currency, accepted across thousands of kilometers and hundreds of distinct cultures. From the coastal hubs, these shells began an incredible eastward journey. Traders carried them along river valleys and mountain passes, deep into the interior. They reached the powerful nations of the Great Lakes, the nomadic tribes of the Great Plains, and even into the American Southwest. In exchange for these luminous white shells, the coastal traders received commodities that were precious to them. Buffalo robes from the plains provided unparalleled warmth. Nuggets of nearly pure copper from the shores of Lake Superior, a metal known and worked for thousands of years, were fashioned into sacred tools and regalia. Pipe stone, a soft red stone from a single sacred quarry in present-day Minnesota, was carved into ceremonial pipes that connected the physical and spiritual worlds. Think of it like this. A hunter on the plains might trade 10 buffalo hides for a string of large Dentalium shells. He does not wear the shells. Instead, he later trades that same string to a trapper from the north for fine furs, or to an artisan from the Great Lakes for a copper ornament. The shells themselves hold the value. They are the medium, the trusted token that allows a plains hunter, a coastal diver, and a copper miner, who may never meet and speak completely different languages, to participate in the same economy. This was a continent-spanning marketplace operating without mint, without a central bank, and without written contracts. Its stability relied entirely on a shared consensus of value, a mutual trust in the system that was maintained across generations. This shell money superhighway reveals a profound truth. Long before European coins crossed the Atlantic, North America had already solved one of humanity's great puzzles, creating a unified economic language spoken from the Pacific coast to the forests of the East. That silent consensus of value, built on shells and trust, had its echo in another desert where the currency was cent and the tolls were paid in gold. While silk would later define East-West exchange, the original luxury goods highway flowed with the aroma of divinity itself. This was the Incense Road, a network of caravan trails so perilous and profitable it built kingdoms from nothing and drew the gaze of empires. Its treasures were frankincense and myrrh, resins harvested from scraggly, unlikely trees that grew only in the arid lands of southern Arabia, in what is now Oman and Yemen. To the ancient world, these were not mere perfumes. They were the breath of the gods, essential for every sacred ritual in temples from Babylon to Jerusalem to Rome. They were medicine, status symbols, and an absolute necessity for honoring the dead. Their value, weight for weight, rivaled gold. But the trees were only the beginning. The true story is in the journey. Caravans of thousands of camels, each beast carrying heavy loads of resin in saddlebags, would form in the lush highlands of the south. They then faced a months-long odyssey northward, following a chain of wells and oases etched into the empty expanse of the Arabian desert. The route was a brutal gauntlet of scorching days, freezing nights, and constant threat from raiders. This immense danger created an opportunity for a people of extraordinary ingenuity, the Nabateans. Originally nomadic traders themselves, the Nabateans did something brilliant. They identified the most defensible choke points along the route, places where the desert cliffs narrowed into sheer canyons, and they built a fortress city to control them all, Petra. Petra was not just a city, it was a masterclass in trade monopoly. Imagine a caravan, exhausted and parched after weeks in the desert, finally reaching the entrance to the Nabatean realm. Before them was not an open road, but a mile-long towering fissure in the rock called the Sikh, just wide enough for a few camels to pass single file. It was a natural trap and utterly indefensible for an attacking force. The Nabateans controlled the water springs within. Any caravan master who refused to pay their hefty tolls would find no water for his animals and no passage through the cliff. At the end of this narrow corridor, the city itself was carved directly into the rose-red sandstone cliffs, a hidden capital of staggering wealth. The Nabateans did not just tax the goods, they added value. They became the expert brokers, bankers, and protectors of the entire incense trade. Their wealth became legendary, so immense it inevitably attracted the hungry eye of Rome. The Romans, after decades of conflict, finally annexed the Nabatean kingdom, not to destroy the trade, but to control its profits for themselves. Yet, for all our knowledge, parts of this road remain stubbornly hidden. The main routes are known, but the precise paths of secondary caravans, the locations of smaller lost oasis stations, and the full extent of Nabatean trade secrets, like how they managed such vast logistics without a written script we can fully decipher, are still partially buried under the shifting sands. The desert that gave birth to this network of unimaginable wealth also became the guardian of its final mysteries. So we are left with a haunting question. What other forgotten metropolises, what other chapters of human connection still lie silent beneath those same sands, waiting only for the right shift in the wind to be revealed? The desert winds that once carried the scent of frankincense also whispered of a different kind of wealth, one measured not in fragrance but in weight and necessity. Far to the west, across the largest hot desert on Earth, another caravan system was forging empires with a trade so fundamental it seems almost absurd in its simplicity. Gold for salt. In the lush river valleys of West Africa, kingdoms like Ghana and later Mali sat atop some of the richest gold deposits the ancient world had ever known. Yet, in those humid, verdant lands, salt was a rare and precious commodity, essential for preserving food and sustaining life. Meanwhile, deep in the heart of the Sahara, vast, blinding white salt flats held mountains of the mineral, but in that barren landscape, gold was just a distant dream. The desert did not just separate these two zones of abundance, it demanded they connect. And so, the trans-Saharan caravans were born, a feat of human endurance that makes modern logistics look effortless. These were not small groups. A single caravan could comprise 10,000 camels, a moving city of leather and hide snaking across the dunes in a line over 25 miles long. Each camel carried heavy slabs of salt mined from places like Tagaza, a settlement so desolate it was built entirely from salt blocks, where the sun's glare off the white landscape could blind the unprepared. Guiding these monstrous expeditions were the masters of the desert, the Tuareg people. Cloaked in indigo robes that stained their skin, earning them the name the Blue Men of the Desert, the Tuareg were the indispensable navigators and protectors. They knew the hidden wells, the signs of approaching sandstorms, and the paths through mountain passes like the Hogar that were invisible to outsiders. Their knowledge was the map, and without them, the gold would stay buried and the salt would remain trapped in the desert. But the secrecy flowed both ways. While the Tuareg guarded the routes, the West African gold miners, often from the Mandinka clans known as the Wangara, guarded the source. They developed ingenious methods to conceal their mines. After extracting gold from riverbeds and shallow pits, they would meticulously replant the area with vegetation, leaving no trace for outsiders. The gold would then be traded silently at designated frontier markets, often through a system of silent barter where goods were left on a riverbank and collected later, never revealing the people behind the wealth. This network of guarded secrets and open exchange did far more than swap minerals. It became a river of ideas. Riding south with the salt and North African goods came Islam, carried by scholars and traders. It flowed north with the gold, along with stories of magnificent African kings like Mansa Musa, whose pilgrimage to Mecca with a caravan of 60,000 people and so much gold he destabilized economies along his route, became the stuff of global legend. The wealth built cities of myth. Timbuktu, once a simple Tuareg campsite, transformed into a nexus of this trade. its great Sankor University attracting scholars from across the Islamic world, its libraries filled with manuscripts on astronomy, law, and medicine. The trade in gold and salt did not just fill coffers, it built a bridge of intellect across a sea of sand, proving that the most forbidding landscapes could not contain the human hunger for connection. That bridge of intellect across the desert finds a strange parallel in the frozen north, where another treasure traveled from darkness into legend. Amber, the northern gold, began its life not as a mineral, but as the sticky resin of ancient conifer forests, weeping from trees that fell and were buried for millions of years along the shores of the Baltic Sea. Tossed onto beaches by storms, these warm, honey-colored stones held captured sunlight and, sometimes, prehistoric insects frozen in time. To the sophisticated civilizations of the Mediterranean, amber was a magical substance, believed to hold the power of the sun, capable of warding off evil and healing ailments. Its journey from a Scandinavian beach to the neck of an Egyptian pharaoh is one of history's most astonishing logistical feats, orchestrated by peoples whose names are largely lost to time. The voyage began with the gatherers along the Baltic coast, but the true power lay with the middlemen. In the Jutland Peninsula and the river valleys of what is now Poland and Germany, cultures like the mysterious Amber people and the widespread Lusatian culture established a formidable control over the trade. They did not just collect amber. They mastered its initial transformation, shaping the raw lumps into standardized beads, pendants, and amulets in workshops whose debris still litters archaeological sites. This was a deliberate strategy, adding value and creating a desirable, finished product before it ever entered the long-distance network. From their hands, the amber entered the riverine highways of Europe, primarily the Vistula and the Dnieper rivers. These were the ancient interstates, carrying goods southward on log rafts and shallows, boats. The route was a relay race of trust and negotiation, passing from one tribal group to the next, moving from the forested north into the steppe lands, and finally down to the shores of the Black Sea. It was at these southern ports that the final, legendary handoff occurred. Mycenaean Greek merchants, then later Phoenician and Greek traders, would meet the northern caravans. To them, these sunstones from the edge of the known world were worth their weight in precious metals. They loaded the amber onto ships and carried it across the Mediterranean, where it entered the lavish economies of empires. The proof of this incredible chain is not just in stories, but in a single, breathtaking artifact. Inside the burial chamber of the Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun, among the staggering wealth of gold and lapis lazuli, archaeologists found several distinctive amber beads. Through chemical analysis, that amber was traced conclusively to the Baltic region. Think about that for a moment. A bead shaped by an artisan in a workshop north of the Alps, traded down rivers through countless hands, sailed across seas, and finally placed around the neck of a boy king in the Valley of the Kings. That single bead is a silent witness to a continent already intimately connected, a whisper across 3,000 miles that speaks of a shared human desire for beauty, magic, and the distant and the rare. But that whisper of a sunstone traveling from the Baltic to Egypt pales before the power held by a few small volcanic islands on the opposite side of the world. For over 1,000 years, the entire global supply of two of the most coveted substances on Earth came from a tiny archipelago in what is now eastern Indonesia. Nutmeg and cloves grew nowhere else but the Moluccas, the legendary Spice Islands. Long before Portuguese caravels or Dutch East India Company ships arrived, these islands were the center of a sophisticated, secretive, and immensely powerful trade network that deliberately kept the wider world in the dark. The true rulers were not European monarchs, but the rival sultanates of Ternate and Tidore, whose power was built not on armies, but on botanical monopoly and brilliant diplomacy. These island kingdoms understood their value completely. They did not simply harvest spices and wait for buyers. They controlled every aspect of the trade with a shrewdness that would impress any modern corporation. Their first move was to form exclusive, secret alliances with the master traders of the region, the Malay and Javanese merchants who commanded the vast trading ships known as Jong. These vessels were the container ships of the medieval Asian world, capable of carrying hundreds of tons of cargo. The sultans made pacts, promising their entire harvest to these specific trading partners. In return, the Malay and Javanese traders provided protection, luxury goods, and, most crucially, their silence. This created a closed loop, a supply chain with no leaks. The spices would leave the Moluccas on these trusted ships, but their ultimate origin was obscured. The next step involved the very rhythms of the planet. The traders mastered the monsoon winds. They would sail west with the spice cargo during the wet monsoon, riding these predictable winds directly to the greatest marketplace in Southeast Asia, the Strait of Malacca. At Malacca, spices from the Moluccas would mix with silks from China, textiles from India, and gems from Burma. Here, in the chaotic, polyglot bustle of the port, the trail went cold. A Persian merchant might buy a sack of cloves, but he would buy it from a Gujarati trader who bought it from a Malay captain who would never reveal where he got it. As far as anyone in Alexandria or Venice knew, these spices simply emerged from the mysterious East. This deliberate obfuscation was a weapon. It kept prices astronomically high and prevented any rival from finding the source and breaking the monopoly. The wealth that flowed back to Ternate and Tidor was staggering. It built ornate palaces, fortified with European cannons bought with spice profits. It funded lavish courts where poets and scholars thrived, and it created a sphere of cultural influence that stretched across the archipelago. The sultans were not just spice farmers, they were geopolitical players who manipulated global desire. Their system was so effective that when the first Portuguese explorers finally stumbled upon the islands in the early 1500s, they were not just discovering a new land, they were crashing a private party that had been running flawlessly for centuries. The European scramble for the Spice Islands was not the beginning of the story. It was a violent, clumsy intrusion into a hidden world of commerce that was already ancient, sophisticated, and perfectly balanced on a secret. The monopoly of the Spice Islands was built on controlling a physical plant. But what if the most valuable commodity was not a plant at all, but an idea carved in stone? 5,000 years ago, long before the first Chinese dynasty, a civilization flourished along the swampy Yangtze River delta that would leave behind one of history's most enigmatic trade legacies. The Liangzhu culture, a sophisticated society of rice farmers, engineers, and artisans, did not build pyramids of limestone. They built a spiritual empire from jade. Their signature artifact is the Kong, a hollow tube encased in a square, often carved with intricate, mask-like faces. These were not tools or weapons. They were ritual objects of profound sacred power, and their story reveals a hidden network of belief that stretched across a continent. The mystery begins with the stone itself. The jade used by the Liangzhu, a tough, greenish nephrite, did not come from their lush homeland. The nearest known source was over 1,000 kilometers to the northwest, in the remote, mountainous regions of what is now Xinjiang. Transporting tons of this incredibly hard stone across such a vast distance without the wheel or draft animals was a monumental undertaking. It implies a trade route of staggering organization and determination, a sacred supply line maintained for centuries. But the journey of the raw stone was only the first step. The true magic happened in the Liangzhu workshops. There, master artisans, using only sand, water, and endless patience, would grind and polish the jade into its final form. A single Kong could take a lifetime to complete. This is where the hidden history becomes clear. The trade was not for a practical resource like salt or obsidian. It was for a manufactured ideology. The Kong was a physical symbol of a specific cosmology, a belief system that linked the square earth to the round heavens. By controlling the supply of the raw material and the production of the finished object, the Liangzhu elite were not just displaying wealth, they were broadcasting and enforcing a shared religious and political order. The distribution of these nearly identical ritual objects tells the tale. Kongs have been found scattered across a vast area of ancient China, far beyond the Liangzhu heartland. They appear in sites of other contemporary cultures. This suggests that possessing a Liangzhu Kong, or a local imitation, was a way for regional leaders to buy into this prestigious belief system, to legitimize their own power by connecting it to a distant spiritual authority. Think of it like a sacred franchise. The central Liangzhu authority provided the brand, the core product, and the doctrine. Local chieftains, by acquiring these jade objects through trade or gift-giving, were effectively paying for membership. They gained status, spiritual legitimacy, and a connection to a wider network of power. The trade in jade was the mechanism that held this ideological confederation together. It created a cultural unity across diverse groups long before any political unification. When the Liangzhu culture mysteriously collapsed around 2,300 years before the Common Era, their cities were abandoned and swallowed by wetlands. But the reverence for jade and the idea of it as a conduit to divine power did not die. It was inherited by later Chinese dynasties, becoming a cornerstone of imperial ritual for millennia. The silent green stones of the Liangzhu were not just art. They were the first missionaries of an idea, traveling 1,000 kilometers to build a realm not of territory, but of shared belief. While the Liangzhu shaped ideology from distant jade, another culture was forging connections from a metal that fell from the sky. On the rugged southern shore of Lake Superior, the largest freshwater lake in the world, lies a landscape scarred by human ambition. Here, thousands of pits, some over 30 feet deep, pockmark the earth. This is not the work of modern industry, but of ancient hands, dating back over 8,000 years. This is the epicenter of the Copper Trail, a hidden industrial enterprise that supplied a continent with its only source of nearly pure, malleable metal. The miners, ancestors of the Ojibwe and other Great Lakes nations, did not have iron tools. Their technology was the earth itself. They would light massive fires against the copper-bearing rock, heating it to a tremendous temperature. Then they would douse the stone with cold lake water, causing it to crack and fracture. Using heavy stone hammers, they would then pry out the gleaming reddish chunks of nearly pure copper, some weighing hundreds of pounds. The scale is staggering. Estimates suggest over 1.5 billion pounds of rock were removed from these pits over millennia. This was not casual gathering. It was systematic extraction, a sustained effort passed down through generations. But the raw copper was just the beginning. The true wonder of this network is where the finished products ended up. In workshops near the mines, artisans would cold hammer the copper into a stunning array of objects. They created practical tools like axes, awls, and fish hooks, prized for their durability. But they also shaped objects of profound beauty and power, ceremonial breastplates, elaborate headdresses, and ritual scepters. These items did not stay local. Through a relay of trade that mirrored the Shell money highways, Lake Superior copper traveled incredible distances. A ceremonial copper axe has been found in a burial mound in present-day Florida. A delicate copper ornament was discovered in a cave in the Ozark Mountains. Ritual breastplates have been unearthed at major mound complex sites like Cahokia near the Mississippi River. This means a piece of metal mined by firelight on a cold northern shore could end up gracing a leader in the humid Gulf Coast or a shaman in the eastern woodlands. The copper's value was twofold. Practically, it was unparalleled, a material that could be sharpened, reshaped, and would not shatter like stone. Spiritually, its origins gave it immense power. This metal did not come from ordinary rock. It was found in pure, brilliant lumps, often in association with meteorites and other celestial phenomena. Many indigenous cosmologies viewed it as a gift from the sky or the underwater panthers, powerful spiritual beings. To possess a piece of Lake Superior copper was to hold a fragment of that sacred power. This created a continent-wide web of connection that was both economic and spiritual. A chief in the southeast might trade precious shells for a copper emblem, not just for its beauty, but to incorporate that northern spiritual potency into his own authority. The Copper Trail reveals a pre-Columbian North America intricately linked by a shared material language, where practical need and sacred belief traveled together along the same hidden paths, binding distant cultures into a single, silent conversation. The copper that bound a continent speaks of a network built on shared belief, but another road carved through the roof of the world traded in a more urgent necessity, the alliance of muscle and mind. While the Northern Silk Road caravan routes through Central Asia dominate our imagination, a parallel and equally perilous highway once thrummed with life far to the south. This was the Tea-Horse Road, a web of trails so treacherous it makes mountain climbing look like a leisurely stroll, and it was the hidden lifeline between empires. For over 1,000 years, this was not a road for luxuries alone, but for a strategic exchange that shaped the destiny of nations. The Chinese heartland needed war horses, the large, sturdy breeds from the high Tibetan plateau that could carry armored soldiers. The Tibetan kingdoms and nomadic tribes, in turn, craved the two great civilizing comforts from China: silk and, most importantly, tea. This was not a casual drink. In the high-altitude, meat-heavy diet of the Himalayas, tea was a vital source of nutrients and a digestive aid. It became a physiological necessity. So a monumental barter system was born, one where bundles of compressed tea bricks became a currency as solid as gold. The engineering required to move these goods defies belief. This was not a flat desert track. The Southern Silk Road wound through the Hengduan Mountains, a tortured landscape of sheer gorges, raging rivers, and peaks that scraped the sky. To cross a chasm, engineers from local tribes like the Lisu and Yi would weave bridges from mountain vines and bamboo cables, swaying constructions stretched over dizzying drops. Paths were not paved, they were clawed into the faces of cliffs, wooden galleries bolted to the rock where a single misstep meant a fall of hundreds of meters. Caravans were not camels, but trains of sure-footed mules and yaks, their bells echoing against stone walls, driven by hardened traders who knew every landslide zone and every safe cave for shelter. Controlling this terrifying geography granted immense power. For centuries, the independent kingdom of Nanzhao, and later the Dali kingdom, ruled over this crucial corridor from their fortress capital near the Erhai Lake. They were the gatekeepers, taxing the tea and horses, and growing wealthy and powerful enough to defy both the Tibetan Empire to the west and the Chinese Tang dynasty to the east. But this road carried more than just commodities. It was a slender thread along which faith quietly traveled. As Buddhist monks and pilgrims journeyed on these trails between the great monastic centers of India and the eager scholars of China, they carried sutras and statues. This southern route became a critical, though less celebrated, conduit for Buddhist thought entering East Asia. Its teachings carried on the same saddlebags as tea bricks. So while history remembers the Northern Silk Road for its silk and spices, the Southern Road was the true frontier, where empires negotiated with mountain kingdoms, where spirituality walked hand in hand with survival, and where the very infrastructure was a daily act of courage, woven from vines and etched into the clouds. The terrifying mountain trails of the Tea-Horse Road traded in survival, but another ancient network dealt exclusively in the visual language of absolute authority. There was a color worth more than gold, a hue so potent it became synonymous with royalty itself. Tyrian purple, the legendary dye that stained the togas of Roman emperors and the robes of Byzantine empresses, began its life not in a vat, but in the putrid ooze of a coastal factory. Its secret was a humble sea snail, the murex, and the civilization that mastered its gruesome alchemy built a maritime empire on the back of a culla. The Phoenicians, master sailors from the narrow coast of modern-day Lebanon, did not just discover how to make this dye, they weaponized the process into a global monopoly. The first stage was a harvest of staggering scale. Divers would collect thousands of murex snails from the seabed. Then, in stinking workshops set away from residential areas, workers would crush the snail's hypobranchial gland, a tiny vein that secreted a clear, slimy liquid. This liquid was not purple, it was a pale yellow. The magic and the horror happened next. The crushed glands were left to ferment in vast, sun-baked vats for days. As the organic matter putrefied, a chemical reaction occurred and the liquid would slowly turn a deep, vibrant purple. The stench from these rotting vats was so notoriously foul that ancient writers described whole towns built downwind of the dye works, the smell a constant, nauseating badge of immense wealth. The yield was almost insultingly small. It took approximately 12,000 snails to produce just a single gram of pure dye, barely enough to color the trim of a single garment. This extreme scarcity is what created its astronomical value. But the Phoenicians' genius was not just in production, it was in distribution and secrecy. To maintain their stranglehold, they could not rely on a single source. So they turned their trading colonies into a network of protected production facilities. When they founded a settlement like Carthage in North Africa or Cadiz in Spain, it was not merely a port for unloading goods, it was a fortified factory. They would identify local beds of murex snails and establish the same foul-smelling dye works there, staffed by trusted artisans under strict Phoenician control. This meant the precious dye could be produced closer to foreign markets without ever revealing the core technical secret. A Roman senator buying a length of purple cloth in Sicily might have no idea it was dyed in a Phoenician-controlled workshop on a nearby island, using a process as guarded as any state secret. This clandestine production network turned color into direct political power. The wealth generated funded the Phoenicians' legendary fleets of sleek, fast galleys, allowed them to establish trading posts from Cyprus to the Atlantic, and made their home city of Tyre so wealthy. Its name became a byword for opulence. To wear Tyrian purple was to announce you could afford a substance literally worth its weight in silver, and that you had the political standing to be allowed to wear it at all. Their monopoly was so complete that for centuries, the origin of the color was shrouded in myth, with some believing it was made from the blood of sea monsters or distilled from sunlight on the waves. The true story of stinking vats and industrial-scale snail harvesting was a hidden history of commerce so valuable that an entire civilization painted its power upon the world, one exquisite, rotten, purple stitch at a time. The secret of Tyrian purple was guarded by stench and sea walls, but another ancient monopoly thrived on open water and shared wind. While the Moluccas held the world hostage with nutmeg, a different spice flowed from a coast so fertile it became a universal marketplace. This was the Malabar coast of southwestern India, the ancient and enduring pepper coast, where a single, pungent berry built a decentralized empire of trade that connected hemispheres. Pepper was not just a seasoning in the ancient world. It was a preservative, a medicine, and a status symbol so ubiquitous that Roman legions were sometimes paid in pepper rations. Its source, however, was a mystery carefully managed by the merchants who grew it. Unlike the secretive sultanates of the Moluccas, the pepper trade of the Malabar coast operated on a different principle, one of open exchange protected by natural law. The key was the monsoon. For 6 months of the year, winds blow steadily from the southwest, from Africa toward India. For the other 6, they reverse, blowing from the northeast back toward Africa. Arab and Indian merchants did not just use these winds, they built their entire calendar around them. They possessed a sacred, guarded knowledge of timing, of when to set sail to catch the perfect wind that would carry a laden ship directly to a foreign shore. Greek and Roman texts speak of this with awe, describing how ships from Egypt would arrive in India as if by magic, riding a wind highway they could not themselves command. The heart of this network was a port so legendary its very existence was debated for centuries. Muziris. Described in Roman records and sung in Tamil poetry, Muziris was the ultimate entrepot, a place where the world met. Recently, archaeologists digging in the silt of the Kerala backwaters made a stunning discovery. They found the remains of a wharf, warehouse foundations, and, most tellingly, hordes of Roman coins from the reigns of emperors like Tiberius and Nero, alongside countless shards of pottery from Italy and the Mediterranean. This was the proof. Here, a Roman merchant would disembark, his ship weighted with gold coins, fine wine, and exquisite glassware. He would be met by a local merchant, a middleman from a powerful guild, who would negotiate for the sacks of black gold, peppercorns dried in the sun. The trade was direct, vast, and immensely profitable for the kingdoms of South India. This network was decentralized, not controlled by a single king, but by a constellation of merchant guilds and local rulers who competed yet cooperated to keep the pepper flowing. A Roman coin found in a South Indian village was not just currency, it was a receipt for a transaction that linked a farmer in the hills of Kerala to a banquet table in Pompeii. The pepper networks made South India the undisputed spice hub for over a millennium, drawing not just Romans, but later Arab, Persian, Chinese, and Jewish traders into its bustling, multicultural ports. It was a system built on mutual need and the unbreakable rhythm of the wind, a hidden highway of taste that flavored the ancient world. That vibrant blue, the color of a deep twilight sky, was more than a pigment. It was a piece of the cosmos made solid. Lapis lazuli, the ultimate celestial stone, began its life in one of the most forbidding places on Earth, the Kokcha River Valley in the mountains of northeastern Afghanistan. The mines of Sare Sang, operational for over 6,000 years, were the sole significant source of this precious stone for the entire ancient world. To reach it, miners descended into narrow, treacherous shafts carved into the arid cliffs, using fire setting and stone tools to extract the rock that held veins of the brilliant blue mineral, often flecked with golden pyrite that looked like stars. But the stone's journey from that remote valley to the workshops of distant empires is a masterclass in invisible logistics. This was not a single caravan route, but a relay race of trust spanning thousands of kilometers where the stone changed hands through a shadowy chain of intermediaries who never saw its final destination. First, local tribes, likely ancestors of peoples like the Bactrians, would mine and roughly shape the lapis. They would then trade it westward, either south into the cities of the Indus Valley civilization, like Harappa, or northwest across the Iranian plateau. The Indus merchants, master traders in their own right, were crucial middlemen. They would incorporate raw lapis into their own bead-making industry, creating standardized drilled beads that were a known commodity, a form of pre-processed wealth that was easy to transport and trade. From there, the stone entered the wider Mesopotamian world. Merchants from great cities like Ur would acquire it, valuing it not just for its beauty, but for its divine association. In Sumerian poetry, the goddess Inanna adorns herself with lapis jewelry, and the stone was inlaid into the eyes of sacred statues to make them see with divine power. A single, spectacular artifact tells this story perfectly. The Standard of Ur, a wooden box from around 2,500 years before the Common Era, decorated with intricate scenes of shell, red limestone, and lapis lazuli. That blue came from Afghanistan, passed through unknown hands, to illustrate the glory of a Sumerian king. But the journey did not stop in Mesopotamia. The trade network acted like a capillary system, drawing the stone further and further. Through diplomatic gift exchanges, royal marriages, and further merchant ventures, lapis lazuli traveled across the Levant and down into Egypt. There, it became the stone of the gods and the pharaohs, representing the heavens and the night sky. Its most famous application is perhaps the most eloquent testament to this hidden network: the funeral mask of Tutankhamun. The stripes of gold and lapis on his Neem's headdress, the inlay of his eyes, that iconic blue was born in an Afghan mountain, traveled across continents and was placed upon the face of a king to ensure his divine passage into the afterlife. For over 3 millennia, this supply chain operated with remarkable consistency, not through the force of a single empire, but through the sustained, silent cooperation of countless cultures who all agreed on one thing: that this particular shade of blue was worth the world. That celestial blue, valued across continents, found its earthly counterpart in a bitter seed that powered an empire. Deep in the rainforests of Mesoamerica, a tree produced a fruit whose beans were so valued they became the literal coin of the realm. The cacao bean was not merely a treat for the Maya and Aztecs, it was the foundation of their entire financial system, a living currency that grew on trees. This was a monetary network so sophisticated it operated on principles that would baffle European bankers for centuries. Cacao trees are delicate, requiring specific conditions of shade, humidity, and warmth found primarily in the tropical lowlands. The beans could not be grown in the cool highland capitals like the Aztecs' Tenochtitlan or the Mayas' Tikal. This geographical necessity created a vital, constant trade artery. Caravans of human porters, called tlamim in Nahuatl, would travel down from the highlands, carrying goods like obsidian tools, woven cotton cloth, and quetzal feathers. They would return with heavy loads of cacao beans, often fermented and dried for transport, their backs bent under sacks of what was essentially walking wealth. In the sprawling markets, cacao was the universal medium of exchange. Historical accounts from Spanish friars record detailed price lists. A single good quality bean could buy a large tomato or a fresh avocado. A handful of beans might purchase a woven mat or a clay pot. For a rabbit, you might pay 10 beans, and for a slave, the price could reach 100 carefully counted beans. But this currency went far beyond the marketplace. It was embedded in the very structure of the state. The Aztec Empire demanded tribute payments from conquered provinces, not just in jewels or feathers, but in standardized sacks of cacao beans. Warriors and civil servants were paid their wages in cacao. To pay a tax or a fine was to literally count out your beans. The system was so pervasive it invited fraud. Just as people today might clip the edges off gold coins, ancient Mesoamericans had their counterfeiters. Archaeologists have found clever forgeries, empty clay shells shaped and painted to look like real cacao beans, meant to be slipped into a payment pile under the cover of night. The existence of counterfeiting is perhaps the ultimate testament to a currency's legitimacy, proof that the trust in its value was absolute. This network created a continent-scale economy that functioned without mint, without metal, and without the concept of debt-based banking. Its value was intrinsic, rooted in the bean's use as a food, its cultural significance in rituals as a drink of the gods, and its controlled, difficult supply. When the Spanish arrived, they initially dismissed the beans as a primitive oddity, until they realized the entire economic engine of the civilizations they sought to conquer was powered by this bitter seed. The cacao economy reveals a financial philosophy built not on abstract promise, but on tangible, consumable, and culturally sacred value. A hidden monetary web where money literally grew on trees. The cacao bean economy was a closed circuit of value, but another ancient empire was hemorrhaging its wealth across an ocean. A single cryptic document survives from the 1st century. a sailor's guide that reads like a merchant's secret dossier. Known as the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, it is not a grand history, but a practical manual. Written in straightforward Greek, it lists ports from the Red Sea down the East African coast and across to India, detailing what to trade, what to avoid, and how to navigate the personalities of local kings. Its very existence reveals a stunning truth. Roman merchants were bypassing centuries of middlemen and sailing directly into the heart of the Indian Ocean trade. The key, once again, was the monsoon. A Greek or Egyptian captain serving Roman markets would wait in ports like Berenice on the Red Sea. When the summer winds shifted, he would raise sail and let the powerful southwestern monsoon blast his ship across the open water in a matter of weeks, a direct line to the Malabar coast. This was a daring, high-stakes gamble, turning a year-long relay into a single seasonal voyage. The Periplus tells them exactly what to bring: massive amounts of gold and silver coin, fine wine, Italian glassware, and red coral from the Mediterranean. In return, the most sought-after cargo was black pepper, but also precious gems like diamonds and sapphires, ivory, tortoiseshell, and, most elusive of all, Chinese silk, which had already found its way to Indian ports. This direct access created a commercial revolution, but it triggered a silent crisis back in Rome. The scale of the gold outflow was staggering and continuous. Roman coins, particularly the gold aureos, became the preferred currency for Indian merchants because of their consistent weight and purity. They were not just spent, they were hoarded, taken out of the Roman economy permanently. This is not speculation, it is physical proof. All along the coast of Tamil Nadu in South India, farmers plowing fields and construction workers digging foundations have unearthed incredible hoards. Pots filled with thousands of Roman gold and silver coins, minted from the reign of Augustus through to Nero and beyond, lie buried in the Indian soil. One recent discovery in the village of Pudukkottai contained over 200 gold coins. These are not the scattered coins of a few shipwrecks, but systematic savings, the accumulated profits of generations of trade. Back in Rome, intellectuals and emperors watched this golden river flow east with deep alarm. The historian Pliny the Elder famously complained that India, China, and Arabia drained at least 100 million sesterces from the empire every year, lamenting that all that gold was given for luxuries that would be worn and consumed. Roman economists understood this was a massive trade deficit, a wealth drain that no amount of territorial conquest could easily replenish. The Periplus, therefore, is more than a map. It is a ledger of globalization's first great imbalance, a record of how the desire for flavor and beauty in Rome built treasuries in distant Tamil kingdoms, connecting economies so directly that the currency of one empire became the buried savings of another. Roman gold flowing east to India created a wealth drain, but a different metal, silver, was simultaneously flowing north, pulled by a hunger for warmth. The Vikings, remembered for their dragon-proud raids, mastered a quieter, more profitable trade that connected frozen forests to the glittering capitals of the East. They were the indispensable middlemen on the Fur Road, a riverine highway that turned Scandinavia from a distant backwater into a pivotal hub of the medieval world. Their journey began not on the open sea, but deep in the Scandinavian and Slavic woodlands, where trappers hunted the most luxurious pelts imaginable. Sable, with its fur so dark and dense it seemed to swallow light. Arctic fox, white as winter snow. Beaver, whose pelts were felted into hats that would become status symbols for centuries. These were not just furs, they were portable wealth, lightweight and immensely valuable in warmer climates where such animals did not thrive. The Vikings did not just collect these pelts, they orchestrated their journey. Using their legendary longships, designed for both ocean waves and shallow rivers, they pushed eastward across the Baltic. They established fortified trading posts at key points like Staraya Ladoga and Novgorod, which became cosmopolitan centers where Norse traders lived alongside Slavic, Finnish, and Baltic peoples. From these hubs, the real adventure began. They portaged their ships from one river system to another, dragging them over log rollers between the headwaters of rivers flowing north and south. Their goal was the mighty Volga River, a liquid highway flowing south to the Caspian Sea and the markets of the Islamic world. Another branch used the Dnieper River to reach the Black Sea and the magnificent city of Constantinople, known to them as Miklagard, the Great City. In Constantinople, Viking mercenaries, the Varangian Guard, protected the Byzantine emperor, but Viking merchants supplied his court with the furs that lined the robes of the elite. Further east, down the Volga, they reached the Abbasid Caliphate's bustling markets, including the legendary city of Baghdad. Here, in exchange for their bundles of northern pelts, they received the one thing their homelands lacked: silver. The Islamic world, connected to mines from Central Asia to North Africa, was a vast reservoir of silver coinage, the dirham. These coins, inscribed with Arabic calligraphy proclaiming the oneness of God, became the fuel of the Viking economy. They did not spend them locally. They hoarded them and carried them home. The proof is buried in the Scandinavian soil. Thousands upon thousands of these Islamic silver dirhams have been found in hoards across Sweden, Denmark, and Norway. Farmers plowing fields still uncover clay pots filled with them, coins minted in Baghdad, Samarkand, and Cairo, all transported thousands of miles north. This silver did more than make individuals rich, it transformed entire societies. Kings used it to pay for armies and build monuments. Artisans melted it down to create breathtaking jewelry, the silver twisted into intricate patterns of the Norse animal style. The influx of capital spurred shipbuilding, exploration, and the consolidation of power. The hidden history here is one of profound connection. A trapper in the Finnish forest setting a snare for a sable was, through a long chain of hands and boats, linked to a banker in Baghdad weighing silver on a scale. The Viking fur road was not a raid, it was a supply chain, making them the critical link between the sophisticated silver-based economy of the Islamic Golden Age and the resource-rich frontier of the Arctic. This network rewrote the map, proving that even the most remote corner of Europe was now a spoke in a wheel of commerce that spanned continents. The silver dirhams buried in Viking soil tell a story of connection, but a different kind of empire was built on a monopoly of pure, cutting power. The great city of Teotihuacan, with its colossal Pyramid of the Sun dominating the Valley of Mexico, did not rise to prominence through military conquest alone. Its true foundation was a mountain of translucent green stone. Just 50 kilometers northeast of the city lay the Pachuca mines, the sole source of a unique, high-quality obsidian with a distinctive greenish hue. This was not just another volcanic glass, it was the finest cutting material in all of Mesoamerica, prized for its consistency and ability to hold an edge sharper than modern steel. Teotihuacan did not simply control this resource, it industrialized it. The city became a sprawling factory, with entire districts dedicated to the mass production of obsidian blades, spear points, and ritual objects. Workshops have been uncovered where thousands of nearly identical prismatic blades, the razor blades of the ancient world, were struck from prepared cores in a breathtakingly efficient process. This was production on an industrial scale, turning a raw material into a standardized, export-ready commodity. The green obsidian from Pachuca then flowed out along trade routes that stretched to the farthest corners of Mesoamerica. Archaeologists have found these distinctive green blades and artifacts in the great Maya city of Tikal, over 1,000 kilometers to the southeast, buried in royal tombs as precious offerings. They appear at Monte Alban in Oaxaca and in centers throughout the Gulf Coast. This widespread distribution reveals a trade network of immense reach and sophistication. But Teotihuacan's genius was not merely in exporting goods, it was in exporting influence. Instead of sending armies, they sent merchants and artisans. In distant cities like Caminaljuyu in the Guatemalan highlands and Matacapan on the Gulf Coast, archaeologists have identified distinct Teotihuacan-style neighborhoods, complete with apartment compounds, talud tablero architecture, and ritual artifacts. These were not conquered territories, but strategic merchant enclaves, outposts of Teotihuacano culture and commerce embedded within foreign societies. Through these enclaves, the city projected a soft power that was perhaps more enduring than military force. Local elites, by adopting Teotihuacan styles, ritual objects made from the green obsidian, and even aspects of its religion, were buying into a prestigious, cosmopolitan identity. The obsidian trade was the physical thread that wove this ideological web, making Teotihuacan the central hub in a vast, interconnected system. Its eventual collapse around the 6th century remains one of archaeology's great puzzles, but the timing is deeply suggestive. Evidence shows that in its final centuries, the city's tight control over the Pachuca mines began to falter. Other centers started producing and trading their own obsidian from different sources. The exclusive monopoly that had fueled its wealth and influence for centuries was breaking down. Could the fall of this mighty metropolis be traced, not to an invasion or a natural disaster, but to something as seemingly mundane as a broken supply chain? When the green stone stopped flowing with the same exclusive authority, did the entire network of cultural prestige and economic dependency it supported simply unravel? The silent green blades scattered across a continent are the fragments of an empire that understood a profound truth, that controlling what people need to cut, to build, and to worship can be a far more powerful form of dominion than any army. That broken monopoly on green obsidian reveals how trade can define an empire, yet another civilization mastered a network that required no maps at all, because the landscape itself was the ledger. For over 60,000 years, the Aboriginal peoples of Australia navigated a continent of staggering extremes using a system of memory so precise it turned geography into song. These were the song lines, the ultimate hidden highways, etched not in stone or on parchment, but in the very stories, ceremonies, and melodies passed from one generation to the next. A song line is an oral map of epic journeys taken by ancestral beings during the dreaming, the foundational era of creation. As these beings moved across the land, singing it into existence, every feature they encountered, a waterhole, a mountain, a distinctive tree, became a verse in a living navigational chant. To travel a song line, a trader would simply sing the country, following the sequence of landmarks encoded in the song. This was a trade route you carried in your mind, a portable guide to a continent. The goods moving along these melodic paths were as diverse as the land itself. From the arid interior came pituri, a powerful narcotic plant carefully prepared and traded over vast distances for its stimulant and medicinal properties. From the northwestern coast came gleaming pearl shell, transported thousands of kilometers inland to become sacred ritual objects. From quarries in specific, spiritually significant locations came high-quality stone for tools and vibrant ochre pigments for ceremonial body painting. Each of these items carried more than practical value. They were tokens of connection, physical pieces of a story that linked people across immense spaces. The true genius of this system, however, lay in the deep ecological knowledge it preserved and transmitted. The songs were not just a list of landmarks. They were a dense database of survival. A particular verse might describe the exact type of tree where honey ants could be found, or the subtle sign in the sand that indicated water lay below. The rhythm of the song could mirror the rhythm of the journey, dictating the pace and timing needed to reach the next reliable water source before the desert heat became unbearable. This knowledge, accumulated over millennia, was the indispensable infrastructure that made continent-wide trade possible in one of the world's most challenging environments. Through this web of sung pathways, over 300 distinct language groups were woven into a single network of ritual exchange, called gift exchange or ceremonial exchange. A man from the coast, carrying pearl shell, would travel inland along a song line, meeting a man from the desert who carried ochre. They would exchange these goods not as a simple commercial transaction, but within a framework of ceremony, storytelling, and the renewal of mutual obligation. The object traded became a physical witness to the relationship, its journey proof of the living connection between peoples and their shared custodianship of the land. This network sustained a continuous cultural conversation for tens of thousands of years, making it arguably the longest-lasting trade system in human history. It functioned without written records, without centralized authority, and without currency, relying entirely on shared memory, reciprocal trust, and a profound sung understanding of the earth. The song lines challenge our very definition of a trade network, suggesting that the most enduring connections are not built on roads, but on remembrance, and that the original internet was not digital but lyrical, broadcast on the human voice across a singing land. The song lines wove a continent together through shared memory, but the very connections that sustained civilizations could also deliver their most profound devastation. Those same caravans and ships that carried silk and spices were also the perfect vectors for invisible, microscopic passengers. The history of trade is also a history of pandemic, a hidden story where the greatest killer was not an army, but a bacterium hitching a ride on a grain sack. The first recorded pandemic in history, the plague of Justinian, offers a terrifying case study. It erupted in the Byzantine Empire in the year 541 in the bustling Egyptian port of Pelusium, a critical hub for grain shipments feeding Constantinople. But its origins lay thousands of kilometers away, along the Silk Road in Central Asia. The bacterium Yersinia pestis, which causes bubonic plague, lived in rodent populations there. As Silk Road trade intensified, it created a perfect highway for the disease. Infected rats and the fleas on their backs would have stowed away in bales of cloth or sacks of grain loaded onto caravans. They traveled the entire network, from oasis to oasis, until they reached the Black Sea ports. There, they boarded ships bound for the Mediterranean. The bustling, densely populated cities of the empire, with their granaries and cramped housing, were a paradise for rats. The plague exploded with horrific speed. Contemporary accounts describe a city in collapse, with corpses piling in the streets and a death toll so high it overwhelmed all burial customs. The pandemic raged for years, killing perhaps half the population of Constantinople and up to 1/4 of the entire eastern Mediterranean. This was not an isolated tragedy. The same networks that moved plague also facilitated the spread of other crowd diseases like measles and smallpox. For these viruses to become endemic, they need a large, constant supply of new hosts, a condition only met by densely populated, interconnected urban centers. Trade routes provided the bridge, allowing diseases that had circulated in one region for centuries to leap into virgin populations with no immunity. The demographic impact was catastrophic and often empire-altering. The Roman Empire, already strained, was further weakened by repeated outbreaks that ravaged its tax, space, and military manpower. Far to the east, similar dynamics along the Silk Road contributed to the fall of China's Han Dynasty, as epidemics swept through a population already suffering from war and famine. This is the dark, unintended consequence of ancient globalization. The same connections that spread art, technology, and wealth also created a unified disease pool, a microscopic web that bound humanity together in shared vulnerability. The flourishing of trade did not just build cities, it created the conditions for their collapse. a sobering reminder that every network carries a hidden cost. While empires crumbled under the weight of invisible plagues, a kingdom forged in fire and gold rose from the sands to its south. The kingdom of Kush, centered in what is now Sudan, was far more than just Egypt's neighbor. It was a hidden trade colossus that briefly rewrote history. Its power stemmed from a masterful control of geography and resources. Kush commanded the critical stretch of the Nile River that acted as the sole highway into the resource-rich heart of sub-Saharan Africa. Any ivory, ebony, or exotic animal skins coming north had to pass through their territory, but their true wealth lay beneath the ground. In the deserts east of the Nile, Kush controlled some of the most prolific gold mines of the ancient world. Egyptian inscriptions speak of the lands of gold in Nubia, and Kushite rulers sent staggering tributes of gold dust, rings, and ingots to pharaohs for centuries. Yet they were not merely suppliers of raw material. In a technological leap that would define their might, the Kushites became one of Africa's earliest and most sophisticated centers of iron production. At their capital of Meroe, far south of Egyptian influence, the remains of massive slag heaps, some over 60 feet high, testify to an industrial-scale operation. They smelted the region's rich iron ore using tall, efficient furnaces fueled by the abundant acacia wood of the savanna, producing weapons and tools of superior quality. This combination was unbeatable. Control of the trade route, endless gold, and advanced iron weaponry. For a long time, this wealth flowed north to Egypt, making the pharaohs richer and the Kushites powerful vassals. But then, the balance of power flipped. In the 8th century before the Common Era, with Egypt weakened by internal division, the Kushite king Pir did the unthinkable. He launched a military campaign northward. His armies, equipped with iron weapons and funded by centuries of gold, swept down the Nile. He did not just raid, he conquered, unifying a fractured Egypt and establishing the 25th dynasty, a line of black pharaohs who ruled both kingdoms from Napata in Kush. This was the ultimate conversion of trade wealth into geopolitical power. For nearly a century, the Kushite pharaohs presided over a renaissance of Egyptian art and culture, restoring temples and traditions. Their reign stands as a profound moment in world history, where the periphery became the core, where the supplier of gold became the wearer of the double crown. It proves that the currents of commerce could reverse, carrying not just goods, but entire dynasties to the center of the ancient stage. The Kushite pharaohs demonstrated how trade could forge an empire, but another civilization used it to conquer a far greater frontier. The settlement of the Pacific Ocean stands as humanity's most audacious act of exploration, a story not of a single voyage, but of a sustained, living network that thrived long after the first canoes landed. This was not a random drift into the unknown. It was a deliberate, continuous conversation across 10,000 miles of open ocean, maintained by a science of wayfinding so precise, it feels like a superpower. The Polynesian navigators, the Kahuna Ho'okele, did not have compasses, charts, or clocks. Their instruments were the world itself. They memorized the night sky as a moving map, knowing how specific stars rose and set over particular islands. They read the ocean's subtle language, feeling the refraction of swells bouncing off distant land, sensing changes in current and wave patterns that whispered of unseen shores. They watched the flight paths of hummingbirds and noted the types of cloud formations that gathered over lagoons. This knowledge, passed down through chants and apprenticeships, turned the vast, featureless Pacific into a familiar neighborhood. And they traveled this neighborhood constantly, not just to explore, but to trade. The network connected islands, separated by weeks of perilous sailing. From the quarries of Mauna Kea on Hawaii came dense, fine-grained basalt, prized for making the strongest stone adzes, essential tools for farming and canoe building. These adze blanks were transported over 2,000 miles to islands where such stone was unavailable. In return, Hawaii received precious feathers, particularly the vibrant red and yellow feathers of honey creepers and honey eaters, painstakingly collected to create the magnificent cloaks and helmets of the alii, the chiefly class. From Tahiti and the Society Islands came finely woven pandanus mats, objects of such cultural value and craftsmanship, they were exchanged in ceremonies and as diplomatic gifts. The Marquesas might send beautifully carved bowls, while the atolls of the Tuamotus traded dried coconut fiber for senet, the vital cordage used to lash together the very canoes that made the trade possible. Even foodstuffs were transported, with sweet potato cuttings, breadfruit seedlings, and domesticated animals like pigs and dogs being carried between archipelagos to ensure genetic diversity and survival. This constant exchange did far more than move goods. It wove distant communities into a single, far-flung family. Royal marriages were arranged between ruling families of Hawaii and Tahiti, binding politics across the sea. Priests and artisans traveled with the trading canoes, sharing new chants, dance forms, and religious ideas. In times of drought or disaster, a sister island could be counted on to send food or supplies. Genetic studies of both ancient and modern Polynesians confirm this sustained connection, showing a remarkable level of gene flow between island groups long after their initial settlement. This hidden web was a lifeline, a cultural safety net that ensured no island was ever truly isolated. It was a testament to a navigational art so advanced that when European explorers like Captain Cook arrived with their chronometers and sextants, they were stunned to find Polynesians who possessed a more intuitive and holistic understanding of the Pacific than they did. The ocean was not a barrier to them, but a pathway, and their trade canoes were the threads that kept the fabric of their world from fraying across the blue expanse. The vastness of the Pacific network was held together by memory and kinship, but another group mastered a world of strangers. The Sogdians did not just travel the Silk Road, they became its nervous system. From their homeland in the fertile valleys of Central Asia, in what is now Uzbekistan and Tajikistan, these merchants built a sprawling diaspora, planting communities in every major city from the Chinese capital of Chang'an all the way to the markets of Constantinople. They were the indispensable middlemen, the polyglot brokers who could negotiate with a Chinese bureaucrat in the morning and a Persian caravan master in the afternoon. Their hidden power was not in armies, but in trust, and they forged it through two revolutionary tools, faith and finance. As they moved, they carried more than silk and spices. They were cultural translators, and their caravans became vehicles for entire religions. A Sogdian merchant might sponsor a Buddhist monk's travel from India to China, helping translate sutras along the way. Later, that same merchant's son, settled in a Chinese city, might convert to Manichaeism, a faith that mixed Christian, Zoroastrian, and Buddhist ideas, and promote it within his network. They even carried Nestorian Christianity deep into the heart of Asia. For the Sogdians, religion was both a personal creed and a professional asset, a shared belief system that built trust across ethnic lines and created reliable communities in far-flung ports. But their most practical innovation was financial. To avoid the incredible risk of carrying heavy coins across bandit-infested deserts, they pioneered an early form of paper money, a credit note called a sufaja. A merchant in Samarkand could deposit his money with a trusted banker and receive a paper note. He could then travel to Chang'an, present that note to a corresponding banker there, and receive his funds in local currency. This system of hawala, or trust-based transfer, was the lifeblood of long-distance trade, moving value without moving metal. The true heartbeat of this network, however, was not in its grand systems, but in its intimate letters. In the early 20th century, in a ruined Chinese watchtower on the edge of the Gobi Desert, archaeologists made a stunning discovery: a mailbag. It contained the private letters of Sogdian merchants and their families, written in their own script on paper and cloth, never delivered. One letter from a woman named Mune to her mother is a heartbreaking cry across the silence. She writes from a Chinese city where she is stranded, her merchant husband gone, pleading for help and describing her poverty in vivid detail. Another letter from a man named Nanai Vandak to his business partners back home details caravan logistics, complaints about poor quality goods, and family news. These are not official records. They are raw human voices, filled with worry, gossip, and the gritty reality of commerce. They reveal the Sogdian world not as a faceless corporation, but as a vast, chattering family firm where every transaction was personal and every journey threatened to stretch a family across a continent. Their diaspora was a web of human connection so strong that when their homeland was conquered by Arab armies in the 8th century, their communities in China and beyond thrived for centuries more, their legacy woven into the fabric of Eurasia. They prove that the greatest commodity traded on the Silk Road was not silk, but understanding itself. The Sogdian letters are a whisper of personal lives woven into a continental trade web, but across the Atlantic, a different kind of communication was being etched onto shells. On a floodplain where the Missouri and Mississippi rivers meet, a city rose that would not be rivaled in size north of Mexico for another 800 years. Cahokia, with its 120 earthen mounds, including the colossal Monk's Mound covering more than 14 acres, was more than a political capital. It was the spiritual and economic engine of a continent, and its currency was carved from the sea. The lifeblood of this Mississippian world flowed north from the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico in the form of whelk and conch shells. These were not casual trinkets. In workshops at Cahokia and other major centers, master artisans transformed the thick walls of these marine shells into objects of breathtaking artistry and profound power. Using stone drills and abrasive sand, they crafted intricate cups, now called dippers, and large circular gorgets to be worn on the chest. The surfaces of these objects were then engraved with a precise, shared visual language. This is the hidden history, a phenomenon archaeologists once called the Southern Cult, but now more accurately term the Southeastern Ceremonial Complex. It was not a cult in the modern sense, but a widespread set of religious symbols that appeared on prestige goods across the entire Southeast, from Oklahoma to the Carolinas and from the Gulf Coast to Wisconsin. The symbols are instantly recognizable and deeply symbolic. A feathered serpent coils with otherworldly grace. A winged being, part bird and part man, holds a mace and a severed head. A hand with an eye in the palm, the so-called eye-in-hand motif, seems to suggest vision and power intertwined. These same images appear on sacred objects made from 3 distinct materials: copper from the Great Lakes, shell from the Gulf, and pottery from local clays. This triad is the key to understanding the network. The raw materials traveled vast distances along the riverine highways, but the ideas traveled with them. A chief in present-day Alabama, receiving a shell gorget engraved with a feathered serpent from a Cahokian envoy, was not just getting a piece of jewelry. He was being given a physical token of a shared cosmology, a membership badge in a prestigious spiritual club that transcended local tribal identities. The trade moved ideology. It provided a unifying framework that helped coordinate the relationships between powerful, competing chiefdoms across a vast region. By adopting these symbols on their own local goods, regional leaders could signal their connection to the central, authoritative power of a place like Cahokia, legitimizing their rule in the eyes of their people and their peers. The network was a conduit for a powerful, cohesive set of beliefs about the universe, the nature of leadership, and the connection between this world and the supernatural one. When you hold one of those shell cups, you're holding a piece of a forgotten concord, a silent agreement across 1,000 miles that some ideas are valuable enough to be carried on the current from the salt of the ocean to the heart of the continent. That shared cosmology, etched in shell and copper, held a continent together, but another alloy held the very fabric of civilization in the Mediterranean world. Bronze was the steel of antiquity, the material of swords, shields, statues, and tools. Yet its secret ingredient was a metal so scarce its sources were state secrets. Bronze is not a pure metal. It is an alloy of copper and tin, typically about 90% copper to 10% tin. That small percentage of tin transformed soft copper into a hard, durable material that could hold a lethal edge. But while copper deposits were widespread, high-quality tin ore was one of the rarest commodities in the ancient world. The entire Bronze Age global economy rested on a handful of distant, precarious mines. The primary sources were in only a few places. One was in the rugged highlands of Afghanistan, near the lapis lazuli mines. Another, incredibly, was in the far western reaches of Europe in Cornwall in southwestern Britain. Think about that for a moment. For a Mycenaean Greek king to cast a bronze spear, the tin in that alloy might have traveled over 3,000 miles, from the misty cliffs of Cornwall across continental Europe, or from the mountains of Afghanistan through Mesopotamia and across the sea. These were not simple trade routes, they were fragile, multi-stage relays passing through countless middlemen, kingdoms, and treacherous landscapes. The system worked magnificently for centuries, creating the opulent palaces of the Hittites, the Egyptians, and the Mycenaeans. Then, around 1,200 years before the Common Era, the threads began to snap. A perfect storm of disasters, from climate change and drought to earthquakes and internal rebellion, shook the Eastern Mediterranean. But a critical, often overlooked catalyst was the catastrophic disruption of these tin supply lines. As political order broke down, the overland routes through Anatolia and the sea lanes across the Eastern Mediterranean became too dangerous for merchant caravans and ships. The tin simply stopped flowing. Suddenly, kingdoms could not replace their weapons of war, their tools for farming, or the sacred vessels for their temples. The bronze smiths, the essential technicians of the age, fell idle. This was not just an economic inconvenience. It was an existential crisis that struck at the military and agricultural heart of these complex states. The search for alternative sources became desperate, likely driving exploration and sparking conflicts over the remaining mines. Some historians suggest the mysterious Sea Peoples, the marauding groups cited in Egyptian records as attackers, may have been, in part, displaced populations or pirates searching for new sources of metal and sustenance in a collapsing world. The result was the Late Bronze Age collapse, a terrifying period where within a few decades, every major palace civilization from Greece to the Levant burned, trade networks vanished, and literacy itself was largely lost in many regions. The world plunged into a dark age. This hidden history reveals a profound vulnerability. These glittering empires, for all their grandeur, were perilously dependent on a single, distant resource flowing along threads of commerce that stretched across the known world. When those threads were cut, the entire tapestry unraveled. It is a stark lesson in interdependence, a reminder that the most advanced societies can be brought low not only by armies, but by a broken supply chain for a metal nobody thinks about until it is gone. The collapse of the Bronze Age world was a lesson in fragility, but some networks proved astonishingly resilient, thriving not on a single metal, but on the very fabric of civilization itself. For over 1,000 years, the looms of Gujarat in western India wove a web of color and pattern that dressed the entire Indian Ocean. Long before European mills, this region was the undisputed textile factory of the world, its hidden export network turning cotton into a global currency. The story begins with a simple plant and an extraordinary craft. The black soil of Gujarat grew superior cotton, and its artisans perfected the art of block printing and dyeing. Using intricate wooden blocks carved with floral motifs, geometric patterns, and later designs tailored for specific foreign markets, they would stamp patterns onto fine cotton cloth. The dyes were a secret alchemy, vibrant reds from madder root, deep blues from indigo, and rich blacks from iron acetate, all fixed with mordants to make the colors fast and sunproof. The result was not just cloth, it was wearable art, lightweight, breathable, and stunningly beautiful in a world dominated by heavy wools and linens. These textiles did not just fill local bazaars, they were engineered for export. From the bustling port of Cambay, ships laden with bales of printed cotton set sail on the monsoon winds. To the west, they crossed the Arabian Sea to the Swahili coast of East Africa. There, Gujarati cloth became a staple of elite fashion, traded for gold, ivory, and exotic woods. In Zanzibar and Kilwa, a thriving merchant class draped themselves in these Indian prints, a visible sign of cosmopolitan connection. Northward, the fabrics reached the ports of the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, where they were carried inland by caravan to markets in Baghdad and Damascus. But perhaps the most profound cultural impact was to the east, in the islands of Indonesia. Here, Gujarati cloth was not merely imported, it was revered. The intricate patterns, particularly the detailed floral and tendril designs, directly influenced the evolution of local batik. Indonesian artisans studied the repeating motifs and color palettes of these trade cloths, adapting them into their own wax-resist dyeing techniques. A Javanese batik pattern you might see today could have a centuries-old ancestor in a textile workshop in Ahmedabad. This was a network of immense sophistication, and it was powered not by a king or an empire, but by specific communities. Jains and Hindu merchant castes, like the Vanyas, ran the entire operation with a blend of piety and business acumen. They developed advanced banking instruments like the hundi, a bill of exchange that allowed a merchant in Malacca to receive payment from a banker in Gujarat without a single coin moving by ship. They operated on a system of partnership and agency, where a young family member would be sent to manage a branch in a foreign port, living within a diaspora community that provided trust and continuity. This created a self-sustaining, decentralized corporation that spanned oceans. For a millennium, Gujarat remained a perpetual economic magnet. Arab dhow captains, Chinese treasure fleet admirals, Portuguese factors, and later Dutch East India Company agents all came to its ports because that was where the cloth was. It was a pre-industrial global brand, built on quality, adaptability, and an unbroken chain of commercial trust. When you consider a simple piece of printed cotton, remember it could once connect a Jain banker in Surat to a Swahili noblewoman in Mombasa and a batik artist in Java, all bound together in a single, splendid, colorful web. The vibrant textiles of Gujarat traveled on a peace secured by the most unlikely guarantors. The Mongol Empire, a name synonymous with terrifying conquest, forged its most enduring legacy not in destruction, but in connection. Beneath the thunder of their cavalry lay a hidden, humming network of administrative genius, the Yam system. This was the empire's true nervous system, a state-funded highway of communication and protection that stretched an almost unimaginable 8,000 kilometers from the shores of Korea to the gates of Hungary. At its heart were the Yam stations, positioned a day's horse ride apart, roughly every 40 kilometers across the entire empire. Each station was a lifeline, stocked with fresh horses, fodder, food, and shelter. An imperial courier bearing urgent messages or important guests could gallop into a station, switch his exhausted mount for a fresh one, and be back on the road in minutes. This allowed the great Khan to receive news from the farthest frontier in a matter of weeks, not months. governing his vast domains with a speed of information that was utterly unprecedented. But the Mongols' true economic insight was extending this protective shield to merchants. They issued a physical token of safe passage called a paisa, usually a tablet of gold, silver, or bronze, inscribed with the Mongol seal. A merchant carrying this paisa was under the direct protection of the Khan. He could use the yam stations for lodging and fresh mounts, and more importantly, he traveled with the absolute assurance that banditry along his route would be met with swift and brutal retribution from the nearest Mongol garrison. For the first time in history, a merchant could plan a journey from Baghdad to Beijing with a reasonable expectation of arriving with his life and goods intact. This deliberate policy created the Pax Mongolica, the Mongol peace, a century of stability across Eurasia. The Silk Road was not just open, it was policed, turning a perilous adventure into a reliable commercial enterprise. The Mongols understood a simple, powerful calculus that taxing a continuous, thriving flow of goods was infinitely more profitable than the one-time plunder of a caravan. The result was an explosion of exchange that reshaped the world. Goods were just the beginning. Technologies, once isolated, now raced along these protected routes. Critical knowledge of gunpowder, perfected in China for fireworks, traveled westward into the hands of Islamic chemists and eventually European armies, altering the very nature of warfare forever. Persian astronomical texts and Chinese medical treatises crossed paths in Mongol-administered libraries. And people moved, most famously, a young Venetian merchant named Marco Polo, whose family journeyed the length of the Yam system under Mongol protection. His later tales of the East, for all their embellishment, were only possible because this infrastructure of safety existed. The Mongol Empire, often painted as a force of pure chaos, was in fact the architect of history's first truly integrated global marketplace, proving that the greatest power sometimes lies not in taking, but in facilitating the flow of everything else. The Mongol peace created a highway for the world, but 1,000 years before their riders patrolled the steppe. Another port thrived in a place most ancient maps labeled simply Terra Incognita, unknown land. On the coast of what is now Tanzania, a city of merchants grew rich on a trade of silent giants. Classical writers, like the anonymous author of the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea and the geographer Ptolemy, wrote of a place called Rapta, the southernmost trading post on the East African coast. It was not a colony, but a fully African city, a cosmopolitan hub where local merchants met Roman and Greek traders who had ridden the monsoon winds from Egypt. The city's wealth came from the interior, from a hidden network that stretched deep into the heart of the continent. This was the African Ivory Superhighway, a system that moved the most coveted luxury material of the ancient world, elephant tusks. But ivory was just the beginning. The caravans also brought rhinoceros horn, prized in the Roman world for its supposed medicinal properties and as material for ornate drinking cups, and the beautiful, mottled shells of hawksbill turtles, used for inlay and jewelry. These goods did not simply appear at the coast. They were the endpoint of a long, organized chain of trade. Hunters and gatherers from the interior would bring tusks and horns to regional middlemen, likely ancestors of Bantu-speaking peoples who were expanding across the region. These goods would then travel down river valleys and along established paths, changing hands through a series of exchanges until they finally reached the coast at Rapta. In return, the interior received the manufactured luxuries of the Mediterranean world: glass beads from Alexandria, fine pottery, wine, and perhaps most importantly, iron tools and weapons. This exchange was transformative, introducing new technologies and accelerating social complexity far inland. Yet for all its documented importance, Rapta itself has vanished. Its exact location is one of archaeology's great puzzles. The descriptions are tantalizing but vague, mentioning a river and a coastline of mangroves. The entire East African coast is a labyrinth of inlets, rivers, and shifting sandbars. Some scholars believe Rapta lies buried under the silt of the Rufiji River delta, its ruins consumed by the very mangrove forests that once sheltered its harbor. Others suggest it has simply been swallowed by the sea, as coastal erosion has dramatically changed the shoreline over 2 millennia. This physical disappearance is profoundly symbolic. Rapta represents not an isolated mystery, but an entire category of lost history. It challenges the persistent, outdated notion that ancient Africa was isolated from global trade circuits. Rapta was not alone. It was likely one of many such ports, a node in a vibrant, coastal civilization that connected the African interior to the Indian Ocean world. These hubs flourished, facilitated immense wealth, and then faded, leaving behind scant traces for archaeologists to find, their stories overwritten by later Swahili city-states and colonial narratives. The lost city of Rapta forces us to listen for a different history, one written not in stone monuments, but in the scatter of Roman beads found hundreds of miles inland, and in the silent testimony of a single elephant tusk harvested in the African savanna, carved in a Roman workshop and lost in a shipwreck off the coast of Italy. Its disappearance whispers that some of the most vital chapters of our shared past are still hidden, waiting beneath the roots of a mangrove swamp or the sands of a forgotten beach. That single bead in Tutankhamun's tomb held more than just market value. It carried a piece of the sun. For the peoples of Northern Europe who first gathered it, amber was not a gemstone, but a divine substance, the physical proof of a celestial miracle. They believed it was solidified sunlight, captured in the resin of ancient trees or the tears of the gods, wept for a fallen hero and washed ashore by the sea. This spiritual understanding transformed the entire trade network from a simple commercial highway into a sacred pilgrimage route. The paths those caravans took may have been more than just the most efficient way to move goods. Some archaeologists and historians theorized that the routes themselves followed ancient solar alignments, connecting ritual sites, sacred groves, and burial mounds that were positioned to catch the light of the solstice sun. The trade journey then mirrored the sun's own path across the sky, a terrestrial echo of a celestial journey. The demand for this material across the Mediterranean world was fueled by more than its beauty. Its mysterious properties seemed to confirm its magical origin. When rubbed against wool or fur, amber generates static electricity, a phenomenon the ancient Greeks noted. It would attract lightweight objects like feathers or bits of straw. To them, this was not physics. It was proof of the stone's living spirit, its pneuma or vital breath. The Greek word for amber is electron, the root of our word electricity, a direct linguistic link to this ancient observation of its strange power. Because of this, amber was believed to hold protective and healing properties. It was worn as an amulet to ward off evil spirits and illness, ground into powders for medicinal potions, and carved into figurines for household shrines. A Roman mother might give her child an amber teething pendant, not just for its smoothness, but because the stone's inherent spirit was thought to soothe pain and protect the infant. In Egypt, its solar connection made it a perfect companion for the sun god Ra, an appropriate adornment for a pharaoh destined to join the solar bark in the afterlife. So the journey of a single amber bead was a convergence of worlds. It moved from a Baltic beach where it was gathered in rituals honoring the sun, down river valleys that may have been sacred pathways, through the hands of traders who understood its dual value, to finally rest in a Mediterranean tomb as a token of eternal light. The Amber Road was not merely moving a commodity. It was transporting captured sunlight, a shared belief in magic that made a piece of the North essential to the rituals of the South, binding continents together in a common awe for a stone that could hold a spark of the divine. That belief in Amber's solar magic required a different kind of alchemy to shape the world, one that demanded a metal far more elusive than gold. The Phoenician monopoly on purple dye was legendary, but their true mastery lay in navigating a much darker sea. While their Mediterranean exploits are famous, their most daring voyages were whispered secrets, journeys into the terrifying, unknown Atlantic to secure the very materials that powered antiquity. Their target was the distant, mist-shrouded coast of Cornwall in Britain, one of the few places on Earth where high-quality tin could be found. This was not a casual trade mission, it was a state secret. The Greek historian Herodotus, writing centuries later, spoke of this trade with awe and frustration, describing a place called the Cassitarides, the Tin Islands, whose location the Phoenicians deliberately obscured with tall tales and misinformation. They wanted the world to believe these islands were a foggy, dangerous myth, while their own ships ran the route with cold precision. To protect this knowledge, they allegedly employed ruthless tactics. Ancient sources claim that if a foreign ship was spotted following their course into the Atlantic, a Phoenician captain might deliberately run his own vessel aground on a hidden reef, luring the pursuer to wreck alongside him. The loss of a single ship and its crew was considered a worthy price to protect a monopoly worth kingdoms. But their Atlantic network did not stop at Britain. Sailing south along the Iberian coast, they tapped into the incredible silver mines of the Rio Tinto region in what is now Spain. The scale of mining here was industrial, with slag heaps still visible today. This silver flowed back to the Levant, financing their cities and their ambitions. The most tantalizing clues, however, point to voyages even further into the abyss. Pottery fragments and inscriptions suggest that Carthaginian successors to the Phoenicians may have used the volcanic islands of the Azores, nearly 1,000 miles out in the Atlantic, as a mid-ocean provisioning stop. This implies a level of navigational confidence and range that rewrites our understanding of ancient seamanship. There are even classical references, though hotly debated, to Phoenician circumnavigation of Africa, a voyage commissioned by an Egyptian pharaoh. Whether that specific journey happened, the cumulative evidence paints a picture of a maritime superpower that viewed the Atlantic not as the end of the world, but as a private backyard, its resources theirs alone to harvest. This clandestine network was the invisible foundation of the Mediterranean Bronze Age. The tin from Cornwall alloyed with Cypriot copper to make the swords of empires. The silver from Spain minted into the coins that paid their armies. By controlling these sources, the Phoenicians and Carthaginians held a chokehold on the material progress of the ancient world, proving that the greatest power often resided not in the spotlight of the known sea, but in the guarded darkness beyond the Pillars of Hercules. But the Phoenicians' secretive voyages for tin were driven by a purely economic logic, a stark contrast to another ocean network where the most valuable cargo was not metal, but reputation. In the archipelagos of eastern Papua New Guinea, a ceremonial circuit of immense power has operated for centuries, one that moves objects of no practical use whatsoever. This is the Kula Ring, a hidden exchange system that turns the entire sea into a theater of social connection. At its heart are two sacred objects: solava, long necklaces of red spondylus shell that must travel clockwise around the ring of islands, and moali, white armbands made from the polished lip of a conch shell that must travel counterclockwise. These are not bought or sold. They are given with elaborate ceremony between lifelong trading partners called Kula partners, men bound by a relationship of honor, obligation, and intense rivalry. The goal is not to accumulate these objects, but to possess them temporarily. A man gains immense status not by hoarding sulava and moali, but by being the conduit through which the most famous, storied pieces flow. He receives a prized armband from a partner on one island, keeps it for a time to display and enhance his prestige, and is then obligated to gift it forward to another partner on the next link in the chain, ideally in exchange for an even more renowned necklace. The history of each object, the names of its previous holders, and the voyages it has made are remembered in song and story, adding to its spiritual weight. This endless, ritualized circulation might seem purely symbolic, but that is where the hidden practicality emerges. The Kula voyage is the ceremonial cover that makes all other trade possible. When a canoe expedition sets out to exchange Kula valuables, it is never empty. Its hull is packed with what anthropologists call gimwali, the barter goods of everyday life. These are the practical necessities: sacks of yams and taro, clay pots, sturdy wooden tools, and bundles of sago palm. The sacred Kula exchange between senior partners opens the door. Once the ritual gifts are presented and the feasting begins, the real market erupts. The junior members of the crew and the villagers on shore engage in vigorous, noisy barter for all these utilitarian goods. The Kula partnership provides the trust framework, the guarantee of safe passage and fair dealing that allows this mundane but vital commerce to flourish. Without the sacred armbands and necklaces moving in their eternal circle, the islands would be isolated. With them, they are woven into a living web where social prestige lubricates the exchange of everything needed for survival. The Kula ring reveals a profound truth about human societies. Sometimes, the most efficient economic system is one that pretends not to be about economics at all, where the real trade in food and tools is hidden in the splendid shadow of a gift that can never be kept. The Kula ring's sacred exchange of shells reveals a truth about all networks, that the most valuable things they carry are often ideas, not objects. This brings us to the final and perhaps most pivotal hidden history of them all, the Silk Road's paper trail. We think of this legendary route in terms of its namesake fabric, but its most transformative export was far more humble, a technology so fundamental it would rewrite how humanity records its own thoughts. That technology was paper, and its journey westward was an act of industrial espionage that changed the world. The story begins not in a peaceful workshop, but on a bloody battlefield far from China's heartland. In the year 751, a Chinese Tang dynasty army clashed with an Abbasid Caliphate force near the Talas River in what is now Kyrgyzstan. The battle itself was a minor frontier skirmish in the grand scheme of empires, but its aftermath held a secret of immense consequence. Among the prisoners taken by the victorious Abbasid forces were a number of Chinese artisans, including, critically, skilled papermakers. These men carried in their minds the closely guarded state secret of turning mulberry bark, hemp, and rags into smooth, durable sheets of paper. Their capture was a catastrophic leak of intellectual property. The Abbasids, understanding the treasure they now possessed, did not imprison these men. They settled them in the newly conquered city of Samarkand, which possessed the perfect conditions for their craft, abundant clean water, and flax. Samarkand quickly became the first major paper manufacturing center outside of China. From this Central Asian hub, the technology spread like wildfire along the very trade routes that had once carried only finished paper as a luxury good. It reached the intellectual capital of Baghdad by the end of the 8th century, where the Abbasid establishment of the House of Wisdom, a legendary library and translation institute, created an insatiable demand for a cheap, durable writing material. Paper, far less expensive than parchment made from animal skins and more versatile than fragile papyrus, was the perfect fuel for this intellectual explosion. It allowed for the mass copying and preservation of Greek philosophy, Persian poetry, Indian mathematics, and Islamic scholarship. Administrative records, scientific treatises, and legal documents could now be produced in volumes previously unimaginable, supercharging the bureaucracy of a vast empire and democratizing knowledge. But paper was just the most dramatic example of a constant, hidden current. The Silk Road was a superhighway for smuggled know-how. The secret of silk production itself? The cultivation of silkworms and the complex reeling of their threads was a Chinese state secret for centuries, protected on pain of death. According to legend, it was finally smuggled out in the 6th century by Byzantine monks who hid silkworm eggs inside hollow bamboo walking sticks. The humble stirrup, a simple metal ring that gave cavalry riders unprecedented stability and leverage, likely migrated from Central Asia into Europe, revolutionizing warfare and contributing to the rise of the medieval knight. Even the principles of woodblock printing, which began in East Asia, traveled these routes, influencing later developments in the Islamic world and possibly even pre-Gutenberg Europe. This relentless flow of ideas exposes the true nature of these ancient networks. They were not merely channels for luxury goods, but the central nervous system of global progress. Every caravan and dhow was a potential vector for a revolutionary concept, a packet of intellectual DNA that could take root in a new civilization and mutate into something world-changing. The battle at Talas was a momentary clash of armies, but its lasting legacy was the silent, willing or forced migration of a few artisans whose knowledge would ultimately pave the way for the Renaissance, the scientific revolution, and the modern world. The greatest treasures were never just in the saddlebags. They were in the minds of the people walking the road, from that first obsidian blade in the Pacific to the smuggled paper technology on the Silk Road. These 30 hidden histories paint a stunning new portrait of our past. They reveal a world not of isolated, mysterious civilizations, but of a single, pulsating organism, its lifeblood flowing along invisible arteries of sand, sea, and river. These networks were the true internet of antiquity, a global web millennia in the making. They moved more than just spices and silk. They transmitted belief systems with a jade Kong, financial trust with a Dentalium shell, and devastating plagues in a grain sack. They carried the songs that mapped a continent and the credit notes that financed an empire. This constant, churning exchange did not merely facilitate history, it actively wrote it. The wealth of the Nabateans built Petra from the scent of incense. The silver of Islam fueled Viking exploration. The tin of Cornwall held the Bronze Age together until its supply chain snapped, plunging kingdoms into darkness. Every rise, every golden age, every catastrophic collapse was intimately tied to the health of these hidden connections. They remind us with undeniable force that globalization is not a modern invention. It is ancient, complex, and woven into the very DNA of human society. Our ancestors were not passive inhabitants of their local valleys. They were active participants in a conversation that spanned continents, their lives shaped by storms in the Indian Ocean and decisions made in a Sogdian counting house. The story of humanity is, fundamentally, a story of connection. So we are left with a final, personal question, a thread for you to pull on. Which of these hidden networks reshaped your understanding of the ancient world the most? Was it the silent shell money superhighway of North America, or the sacred cooler ring that turned economics into ceremony? Share which forgotten exchange captivated you in the comments below. And if you are hungry for more journeys into the shadows of history, subscribe for our next deep dive into the world's greatest mysteries. The past is not a closed book. It is a living map, and we have only just begun to trace its most astonishing roots. That stolen paper technology was a quiet theft that built libraries, but the echoes of these ancient networks are not confined to history books. They resonate in the very world we live in today. The modern map is a palimpsest, a document where the faded lines of the Amber Road and the Incense Trail still whisper beneath the borders of nations. Our dinner tables tell the story. The pepper in your shaker is a direct descendant of the peppercorns that funded South Indian kingdoms. The sugar in your coffee followed the same maritime routes pioneered by Arab and Indian merchants centuries before. Chocolate, once the sacred currency of Mesoamerica, is now a global comfort. its journey from a bitter bean to a sweet bar, a testament to a trade network that transformed an entire continent's economy. The faiths practiced by billions are also travelers on these old roads. Buddhism spread from India to China and Japan along the Silk Road, carried by monks and merchants. Christianity found its way to Ethiopia and India via the Red Sea trade, while Islam expanded rapidly across Africa and Asia, not only through conquest, but along the trusted routes of Muslim traders. These belief systems were not spread by abstract ideas alone, but on the backs of camels and in the holds of ships, embedded in the daily rhythms of commerce and cultural exchange. Even our own bodies carry the genetic signature of these connections. DNA studies reveal a stunning level of mixture across Eurasia, with genes flowing along the very corridors that once carried silk and silver. The populations of the Mediterranean, the steppe, and South Asia are deeply intertwined, their shared ancestry written in a biological code that proves these were not just trade routes, but highways of human migration and family. The myth of pure, isolated civilizations collapses under this genetic evidence, revealing a species that has always been on the move, blending and connecting. This relentless drive to connect is the true legacy. The European age of exploration was not a sudden burst of curiosity, it was a direct, desperate continuation of the spice trade. When the Ottoman Empire controlled the overland routes to the east, Portugal and Spain sought new sea paths, not to discover a new world, but to reach the old markets of India and the Moluccas by another way. Columbus's sails were filled by the same winds that had once carried Gujarati cotton and Roman gold. The entire colonial era, for all its tragic consequences, was sparked by a desire to bypass the middlemen of ancient networks and seize the source itself. To understand these hidden histories is to gain a new lens for viewing our present. The globalization we debate today is not a new phenomenon. It is merely the latest, fastest iteration of a process that began when the first Lapita canoe pushed beyond the horizon. Our supply chain anxieties, our cultural fusions, our globalized economies all have roots that sink deep into the silt of forgotten ports and the dust of caravan stops. These stories challenge us to see humanity not as a collection of separate tribes, but as a single, restless family that has always been weaving itself together, one trade, one idea, one journey at a time. The barriers of desert and ocean were never the end of the story. They were simply the canvas upon which our enduring need for each other was most brilliantly and secretly